welcome back to Pyro Falcon's Let's Play Extravaganza, where today we have a very special video for you as I am joined by Wes Platt, the lead writer and designer of Prologue games.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. He is the man behind Knee Deep, which is one of the games we are Let's Playing currently. You can find links in the video description to Prologue Games, the Knee Deep page on Steam, the playlist for the Let's Play, and all sorts of other things. Check them out and definitely buy this game from Steam. So, I suppose we should get started by you just telling us a little bit about yourself, Wes,
Sure.
and your history.
I'm originally a journalist by trade, but I played with computer games and adventure game toolkits and all that sort of stuff when I was younger. Eventually got working on MUDs and mushes during the 90s. And then ended up working, after leaving the St. Pete Times, after about a decade, I went to work on Fallen Earth, which was a post-apocalyptic MMO that came out in 2009. That ended up with a bunch of layoffs. Game was not as hugely successful as we had hoped. I went back into journalism for a while, and then re-teamed with some of the gang from Fallen Earth to work on Knee Deep. Colin Dwan, who was one of the project managers on Fallen Earth, started his own company here in Durham while I was back at the Herald Sun as a higher education / police reporter at the Herald Sun. And he came to me one day and said, I'm looking at starting up a game company. If you got a project in mind, let's talk about it. We threw around the idea for Knee Deep. He sought funding for it, got it, and asked if I'd join him on the project, and I was overjoyed to do so.
So, which of you came up with the whole idea for Knee Deep, or was it just a collaborative effort?
Even he and I can't take all the credit for it, because what we had at the start was my story idea, which was the idea of the actor found hanging, the people trying to investigate what's going on, and the sinister stuff that's happening all around that. But how the game ended up looking, that really distinctive theatrical style, and the spinning stage, and the rooms that dynamically pull apart or come together depending on what we needed. That was a collaborative thing that came about through the development of Act 1. Because originally when we built Act 1, it was a lot more like a Telltale game with, over-the-shoulder shots and medium shots. It was a lot more like watching a TV show. And it was really through discussions as a team, and there were 7 or 8 of us working on the first act, where we said it wasn't distinctive enough. It didn't stand out. And when we got to thinking about, well, we liked the idea of stage lighting, we liked the idea of the rooms coming apart, coming together. Well, could we just put it all on a stage, just own the fact that this is a theatrical production? And once we did that, it really all fell into place. And that was, on the art design side, the programming side, everybody kind of came together and said, yes, all this is possible, and the result is what you get.
And it really is a very unique motif. It really struck me when you emailed me the offer to do the Let's Play of it. I'm not trying to brag, don't take that. But I do receive a lot of email offers for games to play, and I turn a lot down because Let's Playing is not my main job. I have a day job.
Right.
But once I saw that you had the stage play motif, and especially after I watched the trailer videos and saw that artwork in action, I was floored. Everything between the lighting and the sets folding and unfolding was just amazing, and really, really about as immersive as you can be for that kind of thing, and it is very unique.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough the fact that it is miraculous that it came together the way it did, because we have one animator, we have 2 environmental character artists, and one full-time designer, and we have a couple of programmers, and me doing the writing and some assisting and implementing. But really, that's my strength, is in coming up with the lore and writing the stories and the dialogue. So it was definitely, without all those pieces working together as well as they did, this could never have happened.
And speaking of those pieces, I was perusing the About Us section of the Prologue Games website, and you do have a solid amount of experience to your team. But the one person that I was most interested in was Sharon Hackney, because she was listed as being the set designer and choreographer of the game. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about her role, and what exactly went into all of that set design and choreography, because it could not have been easy coordinating all of those moving pieces at once.
Right. Now, Sharon came in, I think, during Act 2. Either I was right around the launch of Act 1, beginning of development on Act 2, and she's right out of college. So she's, eager to work. She's very creative, and her work ethic is amazing. And she just, we would give her instructions, say, okay, here's the script, here's what I've written. I basically put together playthroughs where we could sit and do table readings of the script, and everybody had a character or 5, because we ended up with like 30 to 40 characters before this is all said and done. So everybody at the table readings got to read the parts, and then she would take the script that I did for the table reading and start translating those into scenes in Unity. Essentially, the artists would take the environmental art, build those pieces out. She would take what I envisioned and make those things happen. So, if I wanted a scene to work, especially, I think the first major thing you really see that she was key in working on is at the beginning of Act 2. And I don't know if you guys have played any of Act 2 yet, but there is a very intricate ballet of stage movements and lighting changes and characters switching and the camera movements. And that was all her getting that going. And then pretty much from Act 2 through the end of Act 3, a lot of what you see from the set design standpoint is Sharon's work. And then from a lighting standpoint, a lot of that was Cory Farris, who's our environmental artist. And then specifically animations and that sort of thing, that was Emanuel Sue. And other character stuff was Robert Anderson. So he is actually working on the models for the characters and some of the props that you're going to see throughout the game.
Was Sharon a programmer as well? Was she working with the tools, or did she kind of sketch everything out like as if it was a real stage play or a physical stage play, and then those instructions were translated by the rest of the crew into computer code?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of it was kind of intuitive for her because we have the giant stage piece, and you set that down in the Unity scene, and then you start putting it's like working with a dollhouse or something, and essentially you put down the pieces because she knows in this particular scene we're going to need the swamp shack and the town hall and the radio station, and they all have to be involved somehow, and then she would work out the best way to make that flow properly. And when you get to Act 3 especially, there are some scenes where you might get to a stage, one of the giant stages, and you might not get to do the thing at the shack because of a choice you made previously. You may be in a part of the swamp instead. So yeah, she kind of had to figure out, and I had to give her a pretty clear outline of what things should be happening where and which scenes. And she just took that and I would say she made it even better than I had intended. In most cases, we would have to sometimes condense things, spread them out a little bit more, rearrange them, and we gave her the flexibility to do that.
It really paid off. I will admit, as of this interview, we have not played to Act 2 yet.
Right.
But even with Act 1, the intricacies of all the moving parts, like I said, is just it floors me every time. Like it was just mind-blowing when I first started the game, even on the menu screen. Just the way, for example, when you highlight the credits section, the walls come down of the diner piece in the top right corner. And just right from that bit, it's going to be a very unique motif. But as much as that blew my mind, I was still really impressed all the way through Act 1. And I'm sure Act 2 and Act 3 are going to be just as awesome.
Yeah, and one thing to note, because I'm watching the shows and I'm enjoying them, but you're talking about...
appreciate that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people talk about the length of Act 1, because we've also had comments on the lengths of Act 2 and 3. They're not as long as Act 1. And there's just a lot of heavy lifting that's being done by Act 1. I mean, we're introducing the 3 main characters, the weird townies, and the town itself and all its lore. So there's all this stuff going on, and then as you get into Acts 2 and 3, things really start ramping up. You already know the characters. It's more about the plot at that point. So I think you'll find that the playthroughs get quicker and quicker. You're not going to do as much bouncing around. And actually, by Act 3, you're playing some of the other characters. Like you'll play Monroe for a little while.
Oh, cool.
You'll play Gallant or Woodstep. So I know you like Woodstep.
Yes, very much so.
For a little bit in Act 3. So, yeah, we were playing a bit with the lengths here because, like I don't know how many stage plays you get to, but a lot of times, the first act does a lot of the heavy lifting, and then when you get to the final act, it's usually short. You come back from intermission, and it wraps everything up with the final collection of plot pieces coming together and characters having their arcs wrapping up, and then the big finale. So that was pretty much our intent going through it.
I haven't seen too many stage plays. I'm kind of in a small town in Ohio, so unfortunately we are not exactly in a cultural capital of the country. But I have been watching a lot of noir movies lately, not just lately, last couple years. So I have to ask, were there any noir movies that you drew this story from? Was it something from your own creation? I mean, obviously there would be elements that were borrowed from classic movies, but I wondered if there was any particular one or two that really inspired this story.
Well, the story itself has been around a good while in my head. The town of Cypress Knee and this creepy little backwater tourist trap that used to be something that isn't anything anymore but wants to be. That's been there for a long time. I've done short stories about it and noodled around with game ideas for it, but this was the first time I actually implemented anything with it. But I think certainly going into the mapping out the story for this, I think from a noir movie standpoint, certainly Chinatown, Touch of Evil, Double Indemnity. There are all kinds of, Maltese Falcon, all these wonderful movies with the hard-boiled detectives and or even Body Heat from the 80s with William Hurt and Kathleen Turner, because I think that takes place in Florida, if I recall correctly. There's all kinds of movies that I've watched from my childhood on that have kind of informed the backbone of this, I guess, some of the moods and things that happen. But other parts of it just come from having been a reporter working in Florida, having grown up in Florida. I worked at Disney World for 4 years and when I was in high school and a little bit into college. So it's in my DNA. I mean, all this stuff about Florida and Crazy Florida Man and all that. Before the internet knew who Florida Man was, I was immersed in that stuff. So, it comes from a pretty true place for me. I mean, when you cover a guy, write about a guy who smuggles himself into a flea market in his homemade pine box.
Wait, what?
Yeah, there was a guy who had himself smuggled into the Newport Richey flea market in Florida, and his whole plan was to get in there in this box, have a friend drop him off in one of the cubicles next to a stand for a jewelry merchant. And the idea was that when the security guys closed up for the night, he was going to get out of his pine box, fill it with the jewelry from next door, because they were all set up for the flea market to open for the weekend. And then he was going to load up that pine box with jewelry, close it up, get out of there, and go with his friend and pawn all this jewelry for money. The mistake that he made was he had his friend wheeling him in, and the guy was talking to the box as he's heading inside. And the security guards hear it, and they come walking over. After the guy leaves, gets in his car and drives off, this guy's still sitting in the box in one of the stalls, and the guards walk over and stand next to it and start talking to each other, saying, I wonder what would happen if we picked up this box and just, dropped it from like 20 feet. What do you think would happen? And they started wrestling with the box, and the guy inside was freaking out, going, don't do it, I got a key, here's my key. So he ended up going to jail for that. So that was just one of many of my Florida Man stories back in the 90s. So yeah, before the internet really knew who Florida Man was, there, and I got to give credit too to people like Dave Barry and Carl Hyacin, who are great Florida writers who got me interested in writing about the weird Florida stuff to begin with. So yeah, I've got a lot of influences that went into this.
Before we started, my broadcast partner, the Akamura, wanted me to ask you why you had set the story in Florida instead of, say, Hollywood, since Hollywood was involved. But I think I have my answer to that.
Yes,
That's incredible.
yeah. There's because it's pretty much I was born and raised in Florida, and yeah, Florida being the tourist haven that it is, and occasionally it flirts with being Hollywood East. I mean, it was for a
That's
little
true.
while. They made some people angry with the tax stuff, but yeah, I think they still get a lot of attention out there for people who want to make movies. Um, Plus, the Scientologists are based in Clearwater, so there's that going for it. It all kind of worked together to be a good thing, a good fit for the story.
So you had mentioned the characters before, and the three main characters that we have played with so far. After speaking to you, obviously Jack Bellet must be heavily influenced from your life, I
Yeah,
would assume.
what's kind of hilarious about all this is that when I first presented the story idea to Colin Dwan, the director producer for our company, Jack was going to be the star. He was going to be. It was all about Jack and his, community news ethics versus this Hollywood story happening right in front of him in his backyard, and then all this stuff that's coalescing around it with the Golden Cypress Project and trying to dig into that. And then Romana came along. We decided we wanted additional characters in the story, so we wanted the traditional hard-boiled noir detective in Casey Gaddis. And I thought, well, we should probably get somebody who's kind of like the young hip blogger who presents a foil to Jack because she's like the new media, social media savvy person, and he can barely keep up with being a print journalist. But she ended up taking over. Again, because Jack can't keep up, Romana takes over the story in many ways, especially by the end of Act One.
Absolutely.
I think she and the other main characters kind of back off a little bit by Act Three, so that the secondary characters get a little more face time, and you get to invest a little more emotion in them, I think.
I'll say this, though. Speaking of emotion, Casey Gaddis's introduction, the art style, the entire storyline behind what he was doing. I'm probably not spoiling it. I think it's episode 6 or so of my Let's Play. But where he's literally like 2 seconds away from suicide when he gets the call to start investigating it. I have never played any adventure game that immediately hooks me on a character that fast. And it wasn't just, again, just one element of it. It was everything. The black and white lighting, just everything was absolutely amazing.
Thanks. That was working as a team, but people like Cory Farris on our lighting side, when we were working on Act One, especially as we're introducing these characters for the first time, we felt that everything ought to help serve the character development for telling the story, and you can't do it all through dialogue. You can't. You can do some of it through dialogue, some of it through the music that sets the mood. But the lighting, doing a very straight black and white noir style for him when he starts out gives you that stark black and white feeling that this guy is at the end of his rope, and to see that color start bleeding back in as he gets into the story and starts finding his groove as an investigator again, that was very much a very conscious choice on our part. So like with Romana, you see her palette starts off, it's very cool and blue, like the glow of a smartphone, and Jack is more like these stark oranges and yellows, a little more of the neon Miami kind of colors. And then by the end of Act One, their palettes have pretty much normalized when they're together. So yeah, there was definitely a sense of progression and growth, and certainly desperation in that first scene you get with Gaddis, and I'm glad that came across.
So, speaking of all three of the main characters, when they get together, their interactions with each other are just amazing, and their interactions with the world in general. But what I really like for Knee Deep in particular is that you have the choice over how they interact in some respects. And I don't just mean from dialogue options, but specifically the journalism aspect, where with, well, I guess all three of them can make their reports or write their blog stories or whatever with different voices. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because not only do I find that mechanic fascinating, especially since you see kind of a likes and shares Facebook kind of situation where you get immediate feedback on how good your approach was. But also the fact that, especially since you were the lead writer, you must have been the one to write all of the different spins on those stories. So I wondered if you could take me through your process of that, trying to get into the heads of the characters in multiple ways, and how that could translate into the game itself.
Right. Well, I wrote a lot of them, but we also had a writer working, at least on Act One, Josh Peary, who was also one of our compatriots on Fallen Earth, who helped out writing a lot of Bellett's stuff and some of Gaddis's reports in the Act One period. But yeah, there was definitely I saw that as a huge opportunity for developing who these characters are and what their jobs are like. So for Bellett, he's writing for his community newspaper, right? So you're going to see more of a community news spin as much as possible. And if he starts venturing away from that, or if he writes about things that should be meaningful to his community but upsets his community, he may get some traction, but it may not be the traction he wants. With Romana, of course, the more hits she gets on her blog, the better, for her boss, at least, not necessarily for the people she's writing about. And I personally love the fact that you may post something and think, oh, nothing's ever going to come of that, and then 10 seconds later you're facing a person that you were just writing about, a friend of Donovan Miller. You just were talking right about Tag Kern in his underwear, and now Miller is confronting you because you said that was an important part of your story. So yeah, I want players to be able to think about that and make choices. I mean, I think a lot of times people will take the cautious route because they think they as a person would do that, but I'm like, it's role playing. I mean, one of the things that I do is to I run a mush, a multi-user shared hallucination is what they're called, but it's essentially an online role-playing game, and it's people write poses back and forth. It's collaborative fiction, but it's done in real time. So my job in running Other Space, which is the mush I did for the longest time, it's still going after nearly 18 years. But the job is to play multiple characters, usually in scenes that are happening in parallel. So I have to jump from, playing some criminal mastermind to hard-boiled detective to, gruff fighter pilot to something. You're having to bounce between these people, find all their voices, and be consistent in jumping between them. So I kind of took that, plus the fact that as a newspaper reporter, and I think one of the things as a reporter that lent to doing something like Other Space and doing something like this is I interviewed lots and lots of people for multiple stories. So, I mean, I did thousands of stories when I worked at the St. Petersburg Times. And for a given story, I'd talk to 2, 3, 4 different people. And everybody's got a different voice, right? And when I'm having to quote people, I'm not condensing them all and turning them into characters that sound like me. I'm trying to use their voice as much as possible, and if I clean up anything, it's more like a grammatical thing, or it's not going to be, I'm really not trying to put my voice in their mouth. So when I'm doing a character like Gaddis, there's a certain way that he does things. So his inflammatory has nothing really to do with what he's writing about in the report as much as what he's trying to get away with on the expense report. Right, so it's the cautious version on him is that he may only charge $10 for a few things, and if he's inflammatory, it's going to be $75 for the Jesus Christ beer cozy and the the swamp sauce. So, yeah, with Romana, like I said, inflammatory is usually better for her, and Bellet. Just stay away from the third rail stuff that gets him in trouble. Um, yeah, and they did help inform, I think, the characters more and fleshed out. And it's a lot of content. I think we were looking at localization options the other day, so we had to do a full word count. Before you get into the UI of the game, it's around 90,000 words of content
Wow.
in all three acts, I think.
Well, and what I like about it is how much replayability there is of it. I've played a lot of Telltale games. I've even done a few for the show, and not that I'm calling out Telltale games or anything, but one specific one they did, The Wolf Among Us. I found the story interesting, but I did not feel like my choices mattered all that much, and the characters themselves in The Wolf Among Us didn't ever pull me in as tightly as it could have. So I played The Wolf Among Us, and then I was done with it. Whereas with Knee Deep, even before we had finished shooting those first 8 episodes, I was already thinking ahead to when I'm going to replay Knee Deep again, because I want to try playing Jack as a total jerk, or play Phaedra as a total innocent, and that kind of thing, and see how the story is going to change.
Yeah, and I think in fairness to Telltale, because I think they do an amazing job with their games, but they're working with established intellectual properties. So like Wolf Among Us is the Fable comics, right? So
Right.
there's not going to be all the leeway. With Knee Deep, I mean, these are characters I created. I don't have somebody with creative control elsewhere telling me that there's this range of emotion that these people can show, and that's it. You can't do these awful things. It's like, no, we have a lot of flexibility with these characters. We can give the players as much rope as they want. But one of the things that we went into this, particularly this project, was we didn't want to have a fail state. So there are no wrong choices. So you can be a jerk as all three of these characters, and you're still going to get through the story. You just may not get all the story that you would have gotten the first time, and you may get different reactions from people as you go to talk to them. But we didn't, and I certainly didn't want to make a game that you had to keep playing the same piece over and over again because you couldn't do a quick time event, or you got stymied by a puzzle. I've played too many games, and I'm too old and crotchety to want to play a lot of games that are heavy on puzzles, and I want to get to the narrative and the story. And I understand there. If you look at reviews of Knee Deep, there are people who there was a review the other day that called us out because we didn't have very many puzzles, and the puzzles we had were so simple, and they just didn't like the game. And it's like when I see reviews like that, I'm like, kind of like, if you know this isn't a game for you, don't play it.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody review it who is looking for this kind of thing. It's a narrative experience. I want you to be able to feel like you can sit down and play it. And if you want to play it in 5 or 6 hours and be done, great. If you want to play it over time and pace yourself, that's awesome too. You're still going to get the same experience. I'm just not going to make you suffer through things because they're difficult for the sake of being difficult. That's just not the way I'm going to roll. Like I said, I still have to play these games myself, and I'm not going to make a game I don't want to play. But that was also the beautiful thing about Acts 2 and 3 when Sharon was on board is I got to play the game with fresh eyes because she was building these things out, and the art guys were putting the stuff together for her, and I would kind of come in after they'd done all their stuff, and I've been approving bits and pieces as they went, but when I saw them all coming together, that was just amazing.
Earlier you had mentioned the difference between Prologue games and Telltale games and how they tend to work with established IPs. I'm just curious, if money wasn't a factor and you could just randomly grab any intellectual property in existence, is there any game you would like to do, kind of a story-based experience with an established IP, just some sort of IP that you are such a big fan of you wouldn't mind kind of doing a little game version of fan fiction for it?
Yeah, I think one of the obvious ones that comes to mind for me would be Star Wars. I mean, when I was a kid, that was formative for me.
She was our last hope.
No, Jefferson Dean Gallant. There is another.
So certainly that, or Indiana Jones. I think those lend themselves really well. I mean, we've seen great narrative stories come out of those franchises from other developers. So yeah, if there were opportunities to work with those, I think that would be great. But there are some. I'm always astonished and amazed by games like 80 Days, which I don't know if you've played that. If you haven't, you should, and the people who watch your show should, because it's one of these great properties. It's Jules Verne, for crying out loud. It's one of these classic stories. But Meg Janth and the team working on that, was it Cape Guy? They did just an amazing job of creating what is effectively a text adventure, with some interesting imagery and music and sound, and made this really cool timed competition game that I play multiple times, just because I want to see the different threads that you can uncover with that. So I think there are a lot of opportunities out there without even worrying about licensed properties. There's a lot of stuff in the public domain. There's a lot of interesting things that, yeah, I would love to tinker with. I think the other one that comes to mind would be like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the stuff that Douglas Adams did. So yeah, there are certainly Cloud9 kind of dream things to work on. But I've had a pretty good experience so far of working on independent creative projects. The Fallen Earth project was a lot of fun. Again, it was their own IP at Icarus, and then being able to work on something of my own creation. It is going to be hard to top that. It'd be great to work on something that is somebody else's creative nut again, but I gotta say, to be able to make something that came out of my brain and see it come to life with the help of all these other creative, and when I say all, I mean 6 or 7 other creative people, taking that and making it a reality. Yeah, pinch me, because that was really my dream, was to see something of mine come to life in a real professionally developed video game. And between the work that our team did, the voice directors, the voice actors that work with Crash Creative, and the guys who made the music with Skew Sound, oh my God, I couldn't have been happier.
I can't remember if you had mentioned it earlier. How long had you been working on Knee Deep, from, say, that first meeting to the finished product?
I would say between when I first pitched the idea to Colin to the final release of Act 3, probably 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. It was a very quick turnaround.
That's pretty quick now for games nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, there are other episodic games that take years between episodes. So we were definitely of the mindset that once we got the first act out there, the second and third were going to follow rapidly. We wanted to be out within a year. So there was really no slowing down, which I think that worked out well, though, because like I said, there was a lot of heavy lifting that Act 1 had to do. Acts 2 and 3 got progressively shorter because once you're really just doing plot and not so much worrying about developing characters and trying to establish who these people are, it's really just how do those choices that they made in Act 1 start echoing in Acts 2 and 3, and making sure we're hitting all those high points, and we don't have to worry so much about padding for time. And I think that worked out well.
So the Akamura and I still have not reached the end of Knee Deep, but is there room for a sequel? Since you were so happy to work on the original, is there at least a semi-sequel or another idea that you've got percolating up there that we're going to see out of Prologue game soon?
We would never say never to returning to Knee Deep. By the end of Act 3, you'll see that there may be some challenges to doing something that's directly contiguous in a chronological fashion, but there are some other possibilities that we're thinking about that could involve the town. It doesn't have to be within the same parameters of this particular thing. It could be taking place in the past. It could be taking place with just one of the characters somewhere else. We're bouncing with all kinds of ideas, because there's going to be a next thing. We just have to figure out exactly what that's going to be, and see what kind of support we can get for it, and ram ahead.
Well, I will tell you absolutely that you have a lifelong supporter in me, because, oh yeah, full disclosure, I did receive the game for free from Wes, but I always do honest reviews on here, and again, between the motif, the storyline, the writing, the voice acting, just everything, you have made a lifelong fan out of me, and I will support your games until, well, forever. Well, I was going to say until Prologue Games goes under, but let's not say that. Let's just say forever, until you get bored. But
Nice. You ever feel like playing with a space opera game? There's always other space. And I will happily pitch Fallen Earth, which I worked on. I think it's still out there on Steam. Um, it was a fun game to work on. I wish it had done a whole lot better, but hey, it's still got a pretty good fan base too, I think. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear it, and it's always good to be able to talk to folks who have an appreciation for it. I definitely recognize that it's not going to be a game for everybody. There's some people who think it's too much like a visual novel. There's some people who think it's not game enough, and I'm like, I think it's game enough for any. I mean, I see people trying to do the Roger Ebert argument of it's only art if I say it's art. It can't be art if it's this. I'm sorry, if you're having fun with it, and if there are choices you're making, and those choices have impacts, it's as much a game as an Infocom game was when I was a kid, and those were games.
yeah.
It's such a game as a choose your own adventure book is. So if it's not a puzzle game, and we never pretended to be a puzzle game, never advertised it as a puzzle game. So if you buy it thinking it's a puzzle game, that's on you, not us. We presented
Yeah.
a theatrical stage play in a with a video game motif. And we're telling you a story and letting you shape that story as it goes along. If that's the kind of thing people are into, I say more power to you. Go play it and get your friends to play it. If it's not, that's okay too. But if you, I think my ulterior motive in all this is to have people who've played video games and never saw a stage show might play this game and go, well, now I want to go see something at the theater. Or if they are theater fans and they never really played video games and thought they could never get into them, Knee Deep is a great way to do that. So, yeah, I feel like it's a good entry level game for folks who've never really done it before.
Yeah, and not to get too much on a soapbox, but a dear friend of mine named Lena LeRae, she's a game designer herself and writes for indiegaming.com. She and I have had spirited discussions over the term art and game lately because the terms just seem a little under-descriptive now. Because, I agree with you. It took me a while to come around because for a while I thought that games could not be art, and I don't know why. Hideo Kojima, who's the Metal Gear Solid developer, once said that video games cannot be art, even though they are made out of artistic elements. And for a while I agreed with him, but the more games I play, especially now with Steam and the indie scene and the definition of game getting broader and broader, I've come around because every game is its own unique experience. And I agree with you that the reviewers who say that Knee Deep is not gamey enough or not hard enough or not whatever enough are kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
Because the term game, what is a game? There is no real definition of it anymore. All I know is Knee Deep is a great experience, and I was very glad you gave me the opportunity to play it.
Well, I'm glad you did, and it's great watching the shows, and we'll keep sharing them out on Twitter when I catch them and get them out there. And yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope more people get out there and check it out. And and again, I really appreciate you guys taking the time, not just to show it, but to take the time and ask more questions about the game, because I feel like people who slam the game just because they're critics and feel like they have to slam it without reaching out to ask, why did you do this? Why was this choice made? We are here to answer those questions. I don't shy away from that responsibility that I have as the creator of this piece, or at least one of the creators. There's a responsibility I have to answer for what I've done and what we've put together here. And I feel like there's a responsibility on the part of the critic, if they have those questions, to reach out. And if I refuse to answer, that's on me, right? And they can say, we tried to find out what this guy was thinking, but he wouldn't tell us. I just think it's lazy reporting. You know, and I just, yeah, it's unfortunate. You know, as a former journalist, I look at, you know, what's happening today, and that certainly informs some of the conflict you see between Jack and Romana, right? I feel like there's a lot of get it first, get it fast, and we'll worry about it being right and thorough later, you know, because we can update the web page as we go. But you know, for however long it takes to share on a Facebook page, it'll be wrong. It'll be wrong forever as it keeps circulating around the internet as this thing being a fact all of a sudden. Yeah, I get really incensed by lazy journalism like that. So yeah, it's really unfortunate. But yeah, it in a way marks me as somewhat of a dinosaur with my thoughts on that. I mean, I love doing internet stuff for the newspaper, especially when I was at the Herald Sun. There was a lot of internet stuff where we put breaking news up and all that, but we didn't have to really worry about having the whole story up there right away. We would go then work on the print story and get something more thorough for the next day. Um, I think there's a lot to be said for taking that caution and that thorough approach where you get all the bases covered and all the questions you can get answered, and then put something out. You don't have to, you know, pretend like you know everything right away.
Well, you may be a dinosaur in your words, but you are a dinosaur with a Twitter account, and I'm going to put your Twitter account in the video description as well, so if any of my viewers have any other questions for you, they can tweet you, and I'm sure you will be there to respond, since you are so open and willing to respond as well.
Yeah, and my email is out there too, so wes@prologuegames.com. Anybody has questions about the game, feel free to give me a shout. I may, if enough of those come in, I may do some kind of Q&A thing on Steam where I kind of take those questions and then answer them for everybody. So, yeah, definitely open to that.
All right, well, once again, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me and for providing the game for us to play. And again, if you are watching this on YouTube, please follow those links in the video description to check out Knee Deep, Prologue Games, Wes Platt's Twitter account, and other things that I'm going to put down there. Not even sure what all I'm going to put down there, but it'll be a big video description. But also check out the playlist of the Akamura and my Let's Play of Knee Deep. And leave a comment below if there is anything more you wish to say. Do you have any parting words for us, Wes?
No, just thanks again, and thanks to everybody for listening and watching your stream, and have fun.
Absolutely. So, for Wes and for the Akamura, who for some reason didn't go on a mic, thank you all very much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow for another episode. Apparently Rachel has now thought of a question. Go ahead, use my
mic. Fine with answering it.
It's a really awful one. Okay, fuck, marry, kill, Romana, Jack Bellet, and Casey Gaddis.
Yeah, it would have to be, well, I'd probably have to kill Jack. He has to be put out of his misery. So I don't think I'd marry Romana. So yeah, it has to be the other thing for her. Gaddis, well, it is Florida. I think it's legal there now, so. Gaddis
all right, that's going in.
Gaddis has a dog. I love dogs.
Well, it's either that or fuck, marry, kill, Remy, or Remy.
Right, yeah, well, Remy and his problems and his issues. But yeah, Gaddis, the fact that he's got a dog, that's a good thing, so.